was real. Listen. Hi, I'm Traci.
And I'm Kathy.
And this is Curious Explorers. Hey, Kath.
Hey, Trace.
Oh boy, what a day. I feel like it's Mercury is retrograde, but it isn't. But if you told me it was, I would believe you.
I feel like it's always secretly retrograde. It's like sneaking in under the radar.
This is a normal conversation.
I don't really know what that means. You know what I mean?
I hear
I
you.
don't know enough about stuff, but when it's in, you always hear that oh, Mercury is in retrograde. What does that actually mean?
It means when Mercury is retrograde, it means it looks like the planet Mercury is moving backwards. It's not.
Hmm.
But when it moves, I'm going to butcher this, and a bunch of astrologers will rightfully comment. But, depending
And
on
please do.
other planets' orientation in the sky or whatever, it's like I'm just trying this. Leslie McGurk is somewhere like clutching her chest. But basically, it affects different aspects of your life. Mercury has a lot to do with technology and communication. I feel like those were things that were just haywire today, but I'm going to power through it.
You know, I think that's a good idea. I'm going to blame Mercury for everything now.
You should.
When things go right, it will get no credit. But
There's a lot
when
of
they go
people
wrong,
like that.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
My nickname for people like that will now be Mercury, but we'll just keep
Yeah.
that. It'll be our private thing. Don't tell
Yeah. Or just
anybody.
retrograde. You're just retrograde. That's all you are.
But so good to see you.
It's good to see you.
I was looking for things to kind of talk about tonight, and I have some thoughts. I hope I can put my brains back together in this weird kind of murky day so that I can effectively tell you and our beloved listeners what I was looking into. Let's see how I do.
Yeah. And you know what? I have to say, I love that beloved listeners. It's very there's something wonderfully like gothic about that. Like
Dearly
dear
beloveds.
exactly, beloved William. I'm here on the farm thinking of you.
Oh my God. And by the way, before I get into this, our episode tonight, I want to remind people that you could actually belovedly see us in person on our
We would,
anniversary, our 1 year
yeah, that's
anniversary
right.
of Curiously
Not only is it
Exploring.
not only is it our 1 year anniversary, it is Paranormal Day.
Isn't that
It's National
amazing?
Paranormal Day,
Best day.
and so what I would like to say is we would beloved to see you there. That's I'd like to thank Tracy for setting up a really nice, easy target for me so I could take that shot. Yeah, come on out to Asbury Park, Madison Avenue, 600 Madison Avenue. It's the backside of the Paranormal Museum. We're going to have actually a bunch. I just got another great podcaster that's going to be there.
Sorry.
So there's going to be, don't worry. Listen, I'm so excited. It's not my dog.
Demon dog. Seriously.
So excited. So no, they know, they sense it. They got excited when they heard about the Jersey Devil.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah. And honestly, we have 40 vendors. We have, we're going to be doing a walking tour, and I'm also going to be doing, um, I'm going to be telling the story of the birth of the Jersey Devil around 2:30 in the afternoon. So it's going to be kind of like a live storytelling. Adam Berry's going to be there. A Road Soda, who's a great band, plays it. A bunch of our stuff is going to be there. And I just think it's going to be a great fun day, and you'll be able to meet me. You'll be able to meet Tracy. There's going to be a bunch of other podcasters there. So, listen, what else do you have to do? Come on, get it together.
Seriously. May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Mostly May 2nd and 3rd.
Right.
And if
The film festival is Friday night. It's also Saturday, all day Saturday, but pretty much everything is going to be. If you can only choose one day to come on Saturday. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And Pod Barons, Saturday.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to give a shout out to the Severed podcast. They will be podcasting at the Pod
Yes,
Barons.
very excited.
It's such a great podcast. They're so much more organized than I could ever be. So it's not
No,
like
they're
this at
fun.
all, but it's intriguing and suspenseful, and you'll love it. Check it out.
And there's a real, like, Long Island vibe to it. There's a real kinda East Coast accent to it. It's a lot of fun. They cover. I just listened to a podcast that they did, which was the Joey Buttafuoco
Oh my
one.
god.
That where they
Yeah.
covered that case. Because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about like kicking it '90s style with some of the horrible crimes that that happened in the
My
'90s
god.
that became kind of like culturally iconic and you know the Buttafuoco one. Number one, we got Amy Fisher
Oh,
from
yeah.
it. We got Buttafuoco from it, but the victim survived. So
Yeah.
that's not always the case with true crime, but no, it's a podcast that's a ton of fun.
It really is, and you'll get to meet them as well, Drew and Harry. So, what I wanted to kind of touch base about today, I'm going to save the little news item for the next episode we record, which might be tonight, just because I think it can wait a little bit. But I think the Jersey Devil Fable Festival and the Film Festival and the Pod Barons, really, it's coming up next week. So I wanted to make sure we gave that a shout out.
Yeah, come visit us.
Come visit us. So, Kathy, I am going to mouse on over and see if I can do this concisely. Probably I can't. That's what editing's for. But we gave an oblique mention to the telepathy tapes last week and or last time we recorded. And I what I mentioned and you and I talked about at length is that telepathy and telepathy research are hardly new. And I went down this kind of rabbit hole. Shocker. With that book, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, and there's another companion book to that. So I got the version that's both books in one. But in that book, they talk about Soviet era psychic, I'm going to say research, and then I
Hmm.
I found some related articles from the 70s. So the book really talks about things more like 40s, 50s, 60s. And then there's a New York Times article about this and a declassified CIA document from the 70s. So I wanted to just kind of toss that rather to you and our audience. But without further ado, let me kind of get into it a little bit. So in the book, one of the primary psychics that they mentioned early on, I'm not done with the book. I'm sure there's going to be more to discovery, but is Wolf Messing, otherwise known as Wolf Gregorievich Messing, who was born in 1899 and passed in 1974. But Wolf Messing was a Polish born Jewish man whose family had escaped Hitler. He was also known as a chain smoking psychic. So during the Stalin years, psychics were supposedly, I mean, this is the report, hunted down, imprisoned, or shot, but not Wolf Messing. So Stalin supposedly had officially abolished ESP. In some of the reading, it looks like the Soviets had been looking into extrasensory perception and all the things under that broad umbrella since at least the 30s. And just as an aside, the remote viewing military guys, the original guys who many of whom are still on this side of the veil and teaching actively, and they say that that's a known thing. It's despite all the disinformation around it, it's a known thing, just like it has been here, although our government took a little bit of a different take on it. I'll get to that in a bit. But Wolf Messing seemed interesting to me because he reportedly was able to use his mental powers to cloud men's minds and make people do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. And, we could say, is that telekinesis, right? You're affecting another object with your mind. Is it mental influence? Is that different from telekinesis? Or is that a type of telekinesis? But Stalin had heard of this. And even though the official position was to prohibit and severely punish parapsychology research and so forth, Stalin had his men kidnap Messing and make him prove his telepathic abilities, his psychic abilities, etc. And I don't know exactly what would have happened if he couldn't prove it. But I guess one of the things he said was that if he was able to prove it in this particular test, that he would give him a substantial amount of money. And if not, all we know is it probably wouldn't have been good. So imagine being Messing, grabbed and being told. I mean, how many people like performing under that kind of pressure anyway? Probably no one. And then having, to be psychic under that pressure seems hard.
Is there did they mention why he was having, because I mean, that's a weird thing. It's like we're gonna kill all the psychics, but then we're gonna kill you if you're not a psychic.
I don't
Was it just because he was afraid that they could possibly, defect, or,
I
I mean,
I honestly don't know. I'm sure there's a lot on the internet that we could find. I mean, just as a complete aside, there is a huge Wikipedia page that I didn't use for this on Wolf Messing specifically, but there are all these notations saying that it's likely not accurate or that it's not
mhm,
fully, there's not enough citation or whatever. So I think a lot of it's gonna be speculation. When I tell you about the New York Times article and the declassified CIA document, maybe it'll shed a little bit of light, maybe it won't.
right,
But basically, the challenge in this instance, it's kind of an interesting challenge, right? Was to use mind control to make a bank teller give Wolf Messing a large sum of money, like from the bank. And then again, if
right,
Wolf succeeded, he'd get a large sum of money. If he didn't succeed, that would have been pretty terrible. So basically, what is reported is that he was told to go into this Russian bank and hand the bank teller a blank piece of paper as if it's like a give me all your money note and somehow make him, without telling him to give him money, make him do it. And that's exactly what
mhm,
happened. So he passed that test. There are other people who are doing parapsychology research. I'm sure there were plenty of other test subjects, but there was also a lot of disinformation
right,
from Stalin's regime and afterwards. But there were a variety of instances where Russians had been experimenting with different sorts of either psychokinesis or telepathy or other types of psi phenomena to see
right.
if it was real. But again, contemporaneously, a bunch of disinformation. We're either not doing it, or it's not scientific, or it's prohibited, or it's a load of crap, or whatever it is. So, some of the experiments mentioned just generally in this book, I have a whole bunch of notes, but I'm not going to read all of them just in the interest of time. But apparently, one of the experiments involved telepathy or psychic empathy, a different type of telepathy between plants and shrimp. And apparently, plants would react if a small shrimp were harmed. And if anybody's interested in experiments with plants where plants have reacted to not only harm to other plants, but anticipated harm or the thought of an experimenter
Right.
wanting to do this. The Secret Life of Plants is one of those books that I think is worth checking out. They did
I will
experiment.
say this though,
Yeah.
I do feel like people need to be careful what they research,
Yeah.
because if they're vegetarians and they start realizing that plants have feelings and emotions too,
It's a
they
tough
will not
read.
have a yeah, they will not be able to eat anything, right? I mean,
Honestly. Totally true. Sorry, this is a totally weird digression, but my father is one of these weird people who's a huge carnivore. I'm not. But even s
you are
I am
not, you
not.
are not.
I'm not.
Mm-mm.
But I don't even Zelda's like, "She's not."
Zelda's like, I am a carnivore.
She's like, "That's all I want." Hold on one
Mhm.
second.
It's funny because you're dealing with that. Finn is behind me snoring so loudly that I'm like, I think everyone's gonna think I'm having like breathing issues. He is
Tracy
snoring
is
so
really
loud.
taking so long with the story.
No, he is behind me snoring so loudly. I don't think anyone would believe that that wasn't a human. Like it's like Fred Flintstone.
Or
He is
Jay.
so loud. Yeah,
It's a whole other story.
my experience is just with Fred Flintstone.
Yeah,
I
she's like,
can't
"I don't know
speak for
about Jay."
Jay. I can't speak with Jay.
So my other tangent about my father, like, so if you tried to like weed and he thought you were taking out a regular plant, like a non-weed, I guess, he would like come out and put the plant back in the ground, right? So, was so c like, if you pulled a leaf off of a tree, he would get angry. He would be totally upset with you, and then he would go inside and eat, like, a turkey sandwich. So, like, I don't
And they go, yeah,
I'm like,
you know.
I it just anyway, this is why I'm a psychologist.
I did both of those things today, by the way. I pulled a leaf off of a tree and I ate
A
a
turkey
turkey
sandwich.
sandwich.
That's
Yeah,
insane.
so everybody at the Stein family would be furious with me today. Furious.
Well, what's so funny is that this is a perfect example of telepathy because I wasn't gonna share that
Yeah.
anecdote.
And it's funny that you went with turkey,
Yeah,
right?
out of
It's
all
funny that you
things,
went with turkey of all things, because we do have this tendency when we think of like animals, it's like, well, birds aren't as like, we don't feel as sorry for
I
birds
mean,
as we do for like
it
cattle.
totally depends. I guess, like, if you watch those Instagram videos where the chicken runs up
Oh,
to the person and jumps up and hugs them, and you're like, "Oh,
oh,
crap."
please.
Um
I Yeah, I mean, I forget what I was. Unfortunately, there are lots of wild turkeys where I am right now, and
Us
they have
too.
not learned to cross the road. So whenever I'm driving, there's just a bunch of headless turkeys.
Oh
But
my god.
yeah, it's awful. I
Kathy,
just
I'm
watched
so
it.
sorry. I
Yeah, no,
have to let
go
her
ahead, go
out
ahead,
or we'll
go ahead,
never do this.
or she'll
Hold on.
tear through the door.
All right. See what I'm saying about this day?
Damn Mercury.
And it's not even doing anything. I can't even blame it, even though I want to.
Listen, you can always blame it. It doesn't matter. Just blame it. Just pick something to blame.
All right. So, yeah. So, by the way, she didn't do anything outside except
Just needed to.
chase deer.
Yeah,
Zelda's like
just
27
needed to
pounds. Do you think
just
she's
needed to,
gonna take a buck down?
express. Yeah, no, she just needed to, prove a point. That's the way these guys are too. I let them outside and they're like, "What are we gonna do? What do you want us to do out here?"
I don't want to go out there.
I
Um,
I just wanted to make noise.
Seriously. So back to
Yeah,
the Russian interest in, not interest
great name
in.
too,
I'm,
right?
I'm,
Great name.
I'm sorry.
Wolf, he had a great name.
Oh yeah,
Wolf,
Wolf.
yeah,
Yeah, Wolf
that's like
Messing
a
sounds like an actor on some like '80s TV
it
show.
it just sounds like a superhero or
He
something,
sounds like he could have starred on Moonlighting. Like I don't know.
Something, yeah, or
But
like
but
a
he was doing something even more mysterious and interesting, I think. The whole idea is that there are books written about this. I won't go into too much detail, but there's some suggestion that Stalin had secretly directed Wolf Messing and others to do all kinds of parapsychological research, probably from the point of view of being a subject rather than an experimenter. But at the same time, again, there's all this disinformation to the press and the international press. So, but some of the experiments the Russians were conducting included other living things. I'm going to try and minimize the distress to our audience, but basically, with rabbits and with kittens, basically, if the moms were separated from their babies, would they know if something not great happened to
mm,
them? And we don't want to think about that. I think you can
and the
find an
answer is yes.
yeah, I mean, it's true that the answer actually is yes, which is
Yes,
interesting.
mhm.
So even animals have mother's intuition, and but with Wolf Messing in a biography of him by Tatiana Lungin, it was said that Wolf could read the thoughts of anyone to whom he spoke quickly. So complete stranger, he could read their thoughts. He could locate missing objects or things hidden from his view. Supposedly, he could spot a criminal on sight. Even more extraordinary, and I don't know what the evidence was for this, but supposedly Wolf Messing could take on the appearance of any animal he chose. I don't know if that's actually true.
That sounds like I mean, there's some of those things that you say in there where you're like, wow, you can understand that in everyday life. Then you start getting into like, well, are we now getting into like hyperbole? Are we now getting into
Folklore,
like,
you know.
yeah, Paul Bunyan kind of stuff,
Although, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to assume that would be a harder sell. For me, it's a harder sell, but this is what I'm going to say. If he is so unusually skilled in hypnosis or mental influence, Is it possible I think it's also more likely that he would make people think
He
that
would
that's
make
true.
you think that he looked like that, right? Rather than he actually physically changing his appearance, he would convince you that he looked a certain way. You know
Yes.
what's interesting though, because you said, well, even animals have maternal instinct, and I would
Of course they do.
I would say, well,
Right.
right. But you wonder if some of these things that they're talking about with regard to his skill set are not actually things that we all that human beings had at one point and have slowly
Oh,
lost
I'm
due
sure.
to technology. You and I have talked about this in the past where we have this presumption that we're moving forward, like we're constantly, if like that our evolution is in some kind of straight line, and
Like up.
we're and we're improving, and that we haven't lost some of those things. And I remember reading an article once where somebody had said, maybe we're not moving towards telepathic communication. Maybe we lost telepathic communication when we gained language, which is a much less, it's languages, it might be a much more precise, but it's a much more limited way of communicating than telepathy. And when I read that article, I was like that, that was like, that's entirely true. And so some of the things that you're talking about with regard to what people suggest he was capable of, it's like, well, maybe these are like remnants of abilities that people had, meaning people, meaning human beings, meaning different levels of human evolution. It's really fascinating stuff.
Oh, it makes complete sense. And, it's interesting what you were saying about verbal language being more precise. I'm going to say sometimes, or a lot of times, maybe we have a lot more words for things than feelings that are easily discerned one from another. But it's interesting because anybody who's done psychic work or just notices their nonverbal impressions, they're instantaneous. And
Oh yeah.
sometimes
And
it's
I
hard
would
to put
say,
into words, so it's
right.
interesting to think about, right?
I would say it's they're far more precise, but far less nuanced, and far and much more limited. I think that even when you learn a second language, you think differently.
Mm.
I mean, like different people who speak different languages literally use their brains differently because the language pushes you into a way of communicating. So language, while it may be precise, it's definitely more limited. So it not only limits your ability to communicate, it limits what you communicate, what you consider communicating, and what ultimately you consider kind of important. Whereas telepathy is going to be far more nuanced, and it's just going to be different. It's going to be difficult to articulate. But when everybody is doing it, there's a certain level of like understood. You know what I mean? That we don't have with verbal language.
Yeah,
I mean, you see
100%.
that with people who are nonverbal. I mean, actually, what we're talking about with regard to people who have autism, that who are communicating in different ways. You
Yeah,
know,
100%. And, again, like, there are things that we just have a very hard time articulating, but if for people who've done any kind of psychic work, the perception is it's again, sometimes it's so hard to put into words what you're getting.
right,
But it's one of those things, it's like you know it when you feel somebody
right.
else's experience in that way and vice versa. I'm not articulating that well, just showing, the
Well, there you go.
limiting
There you go.
language.
But it's very frustrating, right? Because like I understand what you're saying. You know what I mean? So I understand what you're saying. So, but to not be able to articulate that, because it's broader than the language is. It's the language is limiting.
Yeah,
Like it's kind of like when you're talking to somebody, and you just end up going, you know what I mean.
and they're like, "Yeah,
Yeah, I know what you mean. You know what I mean, because you do.
yeah." So interesting, right? I wanna tell you about this New York Times article, and again, these are just snippets, these are pieces of a puzzle, and the puzzle is greater than I feel like even if I spent, like, all month going and combing through documents, it would only give me a certain amount of information, and some of it would be conflicting. Governments can be, I don't wanna sound like a conspiracy theorist because I don't feel like I am, but, governments conceal certain things. Governments are generally practiced at distraction and, moving your attention to something else.
Mhm.
And that's kind of, in this New York Times article, it's from 1977, June 19th, 1977. And the headline is Emigre tells of research in parapsychology for military use. I think there's a typo here because it's digitized from the original article. But basically, somebody who emigrated to the United States described research that was going on in the Soviet Union at the time, parapsychology research for military use specifically. He said that they were doing it for military and police purposes. So this person, August Stern, who at the time had moved to Paris, actually, so he didn't emigrate to the United States, it was to Paris, France, spent 3 years in a secret Siberian laboratory in the late 1960s trying to find a physical basis for psychic energy or, quote, psi particles, as
Mhm.
they were called, or as he called them. And it said, I'm just going to skip over a lot of it, but that there was also a correspondent for the Los Angeles Times at the time who was interrogated that week in Moscow by the KGB and was accused of having received, quote, state secrets about parapsychology. And then Mr. Toth was allowed to leave for home after protests by the United States government. Now, I was alive in 1977, as were you, but I don't
Just
remember.
barely,
Yes.
just
I don't remember anything being made of this, so I don't think it was widely known. Interestingly, there was this parenthetical statement that American specialists who followed Soviet work in parapsychology said they doubted the Russians had made any unusual discoveries. And then in Washington, officials said that they were aware of Soviet research, adding that some of the work appeared aimed at developing psychological warfare methods, which would be different, wouldn't be exactly the same as parapsychological warfare methods. I think that's actually the latter is what they were primarily looking into, but they were looking into both. But
but even the suggestion of one is the other, right? So kind of like, oh yeah, we figured out a way to influence pilots to is psychological work. You know what I mean?
right.
Just saying that they're doing it is kind of a little bit of psychological warfare, which I would assume the United States was doing exactly the same thing. You know what I mean? I would imagine that there were those kinds of things going on
Yeah,
in the United States as
yeah,
well.
I'm sure. I mean, basically, the Toth incident, the guy who was the LA Times reporter, they said that what happened with him had all the earmarks of entrapment. So supposedly, he was found in possession of a 25-page document on parapsychology that supposedly was handed to him on the street just before he was arrested. It's hard to say what really happened, because no matter what, there will be at least 2 sides to that story. Interestingly, the guy who is in Paris telling the New York Times the story at the time was the son of Dr. Mikhail Stern, who was an endocrinologist who was imprisoned before being allowed to leave the Soviet Union in March of 1977. The son, Mr. Stern, August Stern, said he was told before leaving the Soviet Union 2 years prior that there was an even more secret laboratory than the one he knew of in Siberia, that had been set up in Moscow under the direction of the KGB. So I'm just going to kind of skip ahead, but basically the thought is, or the report by this person is that, yeah, there had been parapsychology research going on, despite, I'm going to say, disinformation saying that there wasn't. What's interesting is that, now still there's a lot of skepticism in the scientific community. Certainly there was then. And I think that was encouraged. Even in this 1977 article, people are owning up to the fact that, yeah, not only was the Soviet Union doing this, the US had done research into psi
I mean, wasn't
phenomena.
the start happening around the same time? And
Yep.
and
But
yeah,
what's interesting is that, like, Stargate and all that, I mean, it had a bunch of different names, but that I know was funded by Congress from the '70s, like 1972 to 1995. But what some of the sources in this article are saying that, oh, even in the '50s and '60s, the US
Yeah.
and Stanford Research Institute were doing experiments in telepathy to see whether it could provide an undetectable means of communicating with submarines. Interesting, right?
Right.
Um,
Wasn't the Philadelphia experiment in the 40s? Yeah, I mean,
I don't remember.
yeah, I mean, and that's it. The only reason I'm bringing it up is there's a couple of things that's funny in what you just said, which is the fastest way to convince people that you're doing something is to be like, we're not doing this. Listen,
We're not
the
doing it.
Soviet Union is not, you know, we are not doing
But
any
we'll arrest you
parapsychology.
or something. We'll
We
have, in this country, I guess it would be Men in Black visiting you.
under no circumstances are we doing any, like it's like the fastest way to
Yeah.
convince someone
It's
that you're doing
complete
something.
BS. Look elsewhere.
Absolutely not. Not us. No way. And if we catch you doing it, you know,
If we catch
you're
you doing this thing that isn't real,
yeah, we're gonna give you a lot of money if you can do
but
it.
but we're gonna imprison you otherwise. Uh,
And if you can't do it, we're gonna kill you, you know.
or God knows what. But yeah, I mean, basically, so it's a weird kind of time, right? Because supposedly in 1975, there are Soviet parapsychologists who were persecuted and publicly attacked. Edward Naumov, who's mentioned in the Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain book as a prominent Psi researcher, basically, he was tried on a charge of accepting fees for lectures without permission and was sentenced to 2 years in a labor camp. So I don't know if it's just that the political tide turns and now, even though we've made you do this or wanted you to do this or funded this, now we're going to make sure we effectively silence you. And just to make sure it sticks, we're going to put you in a labor camp for 2 years.
I also think that it's like you can do this as long as you're doing it under the auspices of us. And if you're speaking and educating people without us controlling it, the subject almost doesn't matter. But this subject could be particularly dangerous. So it's
Yes.
probably, it's the dissemination of information that, and let's face it, we talk about the United States. The United States was put with, I mean, that's what McCarthyism was. It wasn't just communism. It was anybody that kind of went outside the norm of what and listen, it's not hasn't changed that much.
No,
I mean, we
no.
have lots of issues
Oh
currently
my
going on as
God.
well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other episode. It's a whole other podcast.
Mercury's in retrograde forever, but yeah,
No, I mean, as you're talking, I'm kind of scanning to see what else I want to share from this. But basically, people want to protect secrets. People want to make sure they have the ultimate advantage. And I have to say, Psi and people who are particularly skilled at that, that can make other people very nervous. I don't just mean in a normal interpersonal setting, like at a cocktail party. I mean, like, it can make people want to figure out, well, what could you know that we don't want people
right,
to know? And
right.
even if you're a government making somebody work for you, there comes a point where maybe they want to make sure you can't work for anybody else
Oh, 100%. Or that you're discredited, or that
or worse.
yeah. Well, and especially if you know a little, you might know a little bit, but we want to make sure that no one believes you that you know a little bit. But it was funny because when you first mentioned behind the Iron Curtain, I thought, I didn't automatically think Soviet Union. I should have, but I thought of you know the Nazis and all of the things,
Oh, sure.
um, all of the resources that they dedicated to not necessarily psi, but I mean,
Like mysticism, occult stuff.
mysticism. Yeah, which
But
is another word. It's a belief system for psi versus just the phenomena of psi. So if you look at this and you say, well, these words said in this certain order um, elicits this action or this power. Essentially, what you're saying is psi exists, but these words harness it and use it. You know what I mean? Like towards some end, towards something that towards some end. And the Nazis had a Hitler had a profound belief in mysticism. I mean, and we all know that he was Catholic, and he also truly believed in the power of objects and the power of mysticism, and he believed in magic, and he believed in all of these things. And so the interesting thing is that if you take it to another step and you start looking at psi as science, as repeatable, as testable, you know what I mean? That's so there was a lot of stuff going on in the 30s and the 40s that almost
100%.
like a psi arms race. You know what I mean? Where
Well,
where it was like if we could just get an edge.
I mean, and I hope I get this right. Lynn Buchanan has talked about this or alluded to this is that after World War II, there were a lot of, now there's a lot of scientists, including parapsychologists, who now need a new kind of scientific home. And I guess Russia pursued, so this is the lore that I have heard, the more parapsychologically inclined scientists. And, I think Americans have always had a more conflicted relationship with psi, except for, I mean, I'm not talking about like spiritualists and things like that, but, and actually that gets to something in this. I'm going to just skip over to this. I'll put the links to these things so people could read the full things if they want. But the CIA declassified a document also in 1977, in April 1977, interestingly, so before the New York Times article came out. I'm just gonna give the very minimal, like, Cliff Notes version, Sparks Notes for the people who are younger, but, this CIA document entitled, "Soviet and East European Parapsychology Research," a report commissioned by the CIA Directorate of Intelligence. It basically said Soviet scientists have long shown an interest in applied paranormal phenomena. There's a point here that I want to make that's, I think, an important distinction between US stuff and Soviet and probably now Russian psi research. But basically, what the CIA report said that there absolutely was funding and control residing largely with the Ministry of Defense and possibly the KGB. They were studying all areas of parapsychology, but heavily emphasized ones that the Soviets believed had the greatest potential for intelligence and military uses. These included clairvoyance, and they put in parentheses remote viewing, interestingly, a very specific term, to acquire intelligence information about remote locations not accessible by other means, obviously useful, telepathy to influence remotely the physical and or mental state of targeted individuals, and telepathy to establish covert, possibly undetectable, again, communication channels, whether with submarines or whatever. And it said that they may also include psychokinesis to affect the operation of remote electronic circuitry. They said in the CIA report that laboratory investigations of paranormal phenomena have been conducted in the Soviet Union since at least the 1930s. But what's interesting to me, especially, is this one paragraph here where it said historically US research had dealt largely with attempting to prove statistically that paranormal processes exist, like, period. And we've talked
Hmm.
about that, and people have, like, gone over and over and over that, but that was the main interest of the US government, at least
Hmm.
at the time. In comparison, basically, Soviet research generally accepted the existence of paranormal phenomena. It was like, yeah, we know. And they assumed that paranormal phenomena, that paranormal abilities followed or obeyed some known physical and chemical laws. Their whole aim, I guess, was to determine the biophysical and physiological aspects of these phenomena, right? So, what's going
Hmm.
on in the body that's either a
Yeah, because how
correlate
can we
or
use
causing
it?
this, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. How do you
Because
make it happen?
if we can figure that out, then we can control it.
Right. And they wanted to find, I'm going to put air quotes, practical uses for
Hmm.
paranormal abilities. And you can, imagine what those practical uses might be if you are trying to be a dominant kind of military force in the world, right? Can you influence what other people think or do? Can you influence their physiology in a way that probably they didn't mean to help them? Although there could have been
Mhm.
other research to that. But I'm thinking if you're thinking in terms of warfare, you want to say, like,
Yeah,
without
I
going
mean,
onto the battlefield, what could we do?
if you're looking at it from a military, or even at this point at a in a political way, it's about asserting a certain power over someone
Yeah.
else for, for your gain.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in the United States, because this is during the time that J.B. Ryan would have been doing a lot of his work to do a statistical analysis for the existence of ESP,
At
which
Duke.
is a phrase he coined,
Right.
right? But also remember, we're capitalists. In the United States, we're capitalists. In So even though the government might be doing some research, you don't have anyone privately doing this type of research, really. I mean, with an enormous amount of money in it.
I
You
mean,
know what I mean?
that
Towards some end.
that's probably not true.
No,
Um,
I mean, you do have people on a small scale, but what you don't have is an enormously powerful government focusing, you know, without having to, because I mean, I think at the same time that the Soviets are doing that, we've got Oppenheimer. You know what I mean? We're looking at changing kind of the military structures through nuclear power, which is not to say exclusively through that, but I do think. I remember somebody talking to me because I think the Kraft family spent a lot of money. They underwrote a lot of a lot of his research, mainly because whoever was, had the money at the time was like, I really want to know what happens. And then as he got closer to death, he was just like, I'm going to figure it out. And kind of pulled funding. So there wasn't a lot of funding for private research. Whereas in the Soviet Union, there was no such thing as private research.
yeah,
Everything was funded by the government. So you really had this machine
and controlled by. Yeah.
that could put an enormous amount of emphasis on that, and that there would be this will that did not ever have to answer to anybody. In the United States, we may not have any real, we may not really have a military power that has to answer to the public, but you at least have to pay lip service to it.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Soviet Union at the time, you certainly didn't have to. So while there might have been this similar experiments happening in the United States, there would have been a whole lot more freedom to do this type of research in the Soviet Union.
You mean like there would have been more research going on? Again, I want to
Yeah,
be
or just
careful with the word freedom only because just
well, yeah. I mean, yes, because
I
in the
think it was
United
probably so
States,
tightly controlled.
right? And they could have, that particular government could do it because it didn't have anyone to really
Right.
respond to.
That I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Not the researchers having freedom, but the government.
Right? No, no, not the
Yeah, sorry.
researchers.
Okay.
The government having that freedom because the government doesn't respond to anybody
Yeah.
or doesn't answer to anybody.
Right. So interesting, right? And I just wanted to kind of put that out there only because, it's just something, it's something I've heard about for a long time. But I wouldn't consider myself like extraordinarily knowledgeable about it. But I thought it was interesting and thought provoking. It's interesting that the cultural difference here has, I think, at many points gotten in the way of doing good parapsychological research. Not that people don't, but you're right, the funding here is harder to get, and
Yeah,
often
because
it is private.
if there isn't a way of capitalizing on it, if there isn't a way of commodifying it, it's going to be very difficult to find funds, unless someone's just generous.
Right. I mean, like, do I assume I hate sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but to me, it wouldn't make sense for some arm of the US government to not still be doing this research or not still be using remote
Oh
viewing,
yeah, I'm
even if they're like,
100% sure. I'm 100% sure they are.
yeah, I
The men
mean,
who stare at goats.
but what's interesting is that, I remember Lynn talking about every year they had to go before Congress and justify why they needed
Hmm.
funding. And it was such a small percentage of the US government's budget even then. I mean, $1 million a year sounds like a lot, but not compared to some of the other stuff that is funded. But the point of all that is that there were people in Congress who absolutely thought this was evil. They used words like satanic,
Hmm.
that kind of, I'm gonna say, puritanical kind of attitude toward
Yeah,
this type of thing, which
silly.
is not an issue was not an issue in the Soviet Union in the past or
Because
Russia now.
they didn't look at it as a moral thing. It didn't fit within a system of belief.
It's like,
It
what, it's
fit
not even
within a
relevant.
system of nature. You know, it's
Yeah.
like if humans can do this, just like the long jump. You know what I mean? If humans can do that, or if they can throw a javelin, I mean, you know,
How do we make it
it's
better
just a yeah. Yeah,
and
how do we
understand it?
hone that? How do we harness it?
Yeah. So interesting.
Very interesting.
So I just wanted to share that with you and with our listeners. I want to just kind of put that out there. I don't know what people think. If people have had experiences or people know something about this. If I got any details wrong, please, feel free to weigh in. I'm going by what I found online, but I'm curious about what people think and what they also would like to hear more about, what they would like us to explore on the show.
And you know, this type of stuff, especially here on the East Coast, we talked about this very briefly the last time we were chatting just about the whole kind of drones and stuff like that. Like what uh you know, we look at these things in our individual lives, but I mean, they do have there are larger kind of larger powers at work watching this stuff. And you know, a lot of stuff gets thrown into kind of a pile of conspiracy theories, but that's also a really good way of hiding something. You know, a really good way of hiding the
Absolutely.
truth is by putting it with, but oh, look how crazy that is, and making people think that it's silly. It's like we said, about like UFOs. If 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you said you believed in life on other planets, people would have said you're crazy. And now, if you say you don't think that there's life on other planets, people think you're crazy
Well,
because we've learned.
depends, right?
Well, I mean, it depends on the life that you're
Yeah.
talking about, but I mean,
No, I mean, it
I
depends
think,
on the person, I think, too,
right.
right? There are
But I mean, I
people.
think most people, because of our understanding of creation now, the size of not just the universe, but the multitude of universes that there are, and just how massive it is. The idea that there isn't life on some level on another planet just is nuts.
Yeah.
And it's just
Well, it's just not
crazy to think.
logical. It
It's just
you
it's
know,
completely illogical. It's completely illogical. Whereas 40 years ago, it was like, well, that's crazy. And
we're the only
we're the only
ones.
ones. You're the only ones,
We're the only ones in the
So
universe.
no, it's interesting.
By the way, just the last thing, where it's what is it? The Italian goodbye that you just it takes an hour to wrap
You
it
never
up. It's not the Irish goodbye.
No, the Irish goodbye, you wouldn't even know I was out. I'd be done. You'd be
Where's
like,
Kathy?
Where'd she go? And it's like, was she even here?
There are still drones. Because I'm like, I don't think that's a star. Definitely not an airplane. Like there are definitely still
Oh,
ones
definitely.
in
But
this
I mean, the
area.
funny thing is that it
It's a
just,
little weird. I don't know what they're
what's
doing.
funny is we didn't talk about this offline, but I got a reading yesterday, and it was very, very interesting. But something came up where we were talking about up here, about the new shop and everything.
Oh,
And she goes, "Wait a second. Are you in a place like Area 51 where there's all of these aliens?" And the funny thing is I am right by Marconi, where Marconi did his shore to ship transatlantic radio experiments. But also, there's an Air Force base. There's a like a defunct
oh my God.
Air Force base here, and it's a famous place for UFO sightings. Like there's
Are you
UFO sightings
kidding?
here all the time. Yeah,
I
yeah,
had
no,
no
and I mean,
idea. Like,
yeah,
I
and
wouldn't
actually,
even know that. And
oh yeah,
obviously, like, she wouldn't know where
Adam and
you
I have
live up there or.
Adam and I have talked. We're going to do a UFO sighting. There's actually a very famous artist up here by the name of Bud Hopkins, and he passed away, I think, within the last 15 or 20 years. But he had kind of had a very successful art career, and then as he got a little bit older, he's like, by the way, I'm an abductee, and he ended up spending the last few decades of his life exploring his experiences as a person who had been abducted, through his art. And so, and it's right here. It's like literally around the corner from where I am. I just thought it was really funny because she was just kind of talking to me. She didn't know where I was. And then she was like, wait a second, wait a second. Are you in like Area 51? Or like she just
That's
got this sense
crazy.
that it was very interesting. Plus, full disclosure, I had a very strange experience up here about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's uh it's not something I even joke about. It was very very unusual for me, and I don't know, it really leans into kind of a some kind of a UFO or multiverse kind of thing, and it was literally on the street that I'm
Okay.
like within a mile and a half
We
of where I
have
am
to
right
do a
now.
podcast episode on that because what I don't want you to do is just give it like, "Oh, it's just" like,
Oh
it's
no, but
actually like a whole huge thing for
I did a
you,
podcast on it. I did a podcast on it. You should listen to it
your
and
other
then let me
podcast.
know if you want to, and then let me know if you want to explore it. I actually did it almost like a confessional. I had this experience, and then I was like, if I don't share this, I'm a coward.
Oh my god.
And I, when you listen to it,
I'm not
you
staying up there
hear,
now.
no. I mean,
I don't wanna
it's
be
not in the house,
abducted
but it I wasn't abducted,
by
but
aliens.
it was um when you listen to that podcast, I you could hear how shaken
Oh my
I
god,
was
Kathy.
by it.
I had no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, I
Holy
was
cow.
shaken by it. I was.
Remember, I I said this and, when I interviewed my colleague about the Rabbit Hole Experience book, Michael Robarts, and we were talking about it was like this just little, of course, I can't help but get in these tangents, but like about how it's not about not believing in aliens and other life that has nothing to do with it, but it's like, I so don't want aliens to
Mm.
come for me. Like, the whole, like, taking you away on the spacecraft thing sounds not good, and
It's not in my wheelhouse of belief. Like it's not in anything. It's not that I believe or I don't believe. It's just never been something that I was interested in. But it's also not something I can deny that happened to me.
oh my
And I
god.
felt that if I didn't share it, I thought it would be unfair not to, considering how I had, looked at other people's experiences and things like that.
No, I think it's good you
But
did.
I thought it was really weird that she brought that up. You know what I mean? Out of nowhere, because I don't think if you're like, oh, Cape Cod, I don't think that's something you would think
And
of.
also she doesn't know you, and it's not
And
like
she really didn't even know where I was, it is funny though, because she also came up, also said, oh, I think you're going to buy a house on Cape Cod, and I was like, I just bought a house on Cape Cod. So it was very interesting to be that kind of plugged in. But when she said that particular thing, I thought it was funny because I don't associate Cape Cod with UFOs.
freaking alien
Yeah.
spacecraft or like an Area
Just
51
UFOs.
type of thing,
I
who
just
would?
I don't, but I mean, this particular area is very well known for that because
I
of
didn't
the
know
Air
that.
Force Base and because of Bud Hopkins
I had
and
no
because of Marconi. But where I
idea.
am in New Jersey is too, though.
I didn't know that
You know,
either.
well, the coasts, where the
Okay.
coasts, and which would also look at USOs and craft that's not necessarily, so you're looking at craft that could be from from underwater,
Oh,
and
good lord.
yeah,
Yeah, it's, like, too much for me.
interesting stuff.
Well,
He's like, I will stick with Soviet stuff. I'm not going to
yeah,
go
like,
with
that's scary
underwater.
enough.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not so good that I have to worry about, any Russians
Yeah,
grabbing me
yeah,
and making me
exactly. Yeah,
do
yeah, yeah.
making me
I'm not.
demonstrate anything,
No one is going to be so
parapsychology.
attracted to my psychic proficiency that I might have to
No.
be, they'll be recruited into the KGB or
Oh
anything like
my
that.
goodness. Yes, no. I'm
And by
thankfully
recruited, we mean kidnapped. You
yes.
know?
I'm thankfully enough in the realm of broad realm of average that I think I am unappealing to
Yes,
enlist in
I am
such a
I am
thing.
sufficiently mundane.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Kath, so good to see you. I'm going to
Good to
see
see you.
you in a little over a
In
week in
person, yay!
person. We're going to have the paranormal cocktail party Friday night with Adam Berry and you. And he's going to, I think, chat for people who buy the ticket for the Adam Berry, Kathy Kelly Ghost
Yeah.
Investigation Weekend.
There's a full investigation weekend that we're doing, which will have the meet and greet, tickets to all of the festivities, including the film festival. Which I have to say, we have some amazing films that came in. A private walking tour that I'll do of the haunted locations in Asbury Park, and then a full investigation of the Paranormal Museum after kind of everything shuts down. I do have to say it's been fairly active, so I think it's going to be a really good one.
I told my neighbors who I've told about some of this stuff that I will not go into the basement. I won't do it
Although anyone who attends will be able to go into the basement, and the
if
basement
you want
does have articefacts in it that I don't put on display, but
because they're
they will
so
be able to
scary.
investigate it. Mhm.
Every
Yeah,
you'll be able to
actually, yes,
investigate
that's
without
it.
me.
Well, like you said, nothing stops them from coming upstairs if they want to.
Oh my god, no. Well, Kath, so
Mm.
great to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm going to try not to think about any of those things we've discussed tonight, well, so I can hopefully get a good night's sleep.
Yes,
But who knows? But I look forward to seeing you soon. And everyone, again, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear more about. And of course, as always, until next time, stay curious.
keep exploring.
Bye for now.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
You've just listened to the Curious Explorers podcast with the Kathy Kelly and Traci Stein. If you enjoyed the episode, remember to like, share, follow, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. And of course, until next time, stay curious.
The paranormal is real. It is real. The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real. It is real.